The word narcissist is just a word. It's a label to help you recognize, yes, they are, they will not change, and they'll make everything your fault. And then it's almost like we need to put a full stop at the end. Now focus on your healing. Do you ever feel like, is this person actually a narcissist? Or am I just going crazy? If that sounds like you, then this episode is definitely for you. Hi, everybody. My name is Caroline Strawson, and a massive welcome to my Trauma and Narcissism Redefined podcast. Your daily dose of weekly. Gosh, imagine if I was doing this daily, you'd get sick of me, wouldn't you? My weekly dose of education, inspiration, and hope for the light at the end of the tunnel, having experienced narcissistic abuse. Again, I just want to reiterate, I'm really, really excited because it's not long now to the launch of a rebrand of my podcast, No Visible Bruises, where I will be sharing survivor stories from those who've experienced narcissistic abuse, domestic abuse, and coercive control. Because really, whatever label we put on that, it's the same thing, to be fair. So I'm really excited. I've got some great guests lined up that I'll be interviewing next week, ready for our very first episode on Tuesday, the 8th of April. I would love your support. Please plaster it everywhere because people need to hear this. And in these new episodes that I'll be doing, they'll be a little bit longer. I'll be filming them in a proper podcast studio. I'm getting all posh. And you'll have the opportunity to watch them on Spotify, watch them on YouTube, or just listen to them. But they'll be really helping you learn all about narcissistic abuse, domestic abuse, coercive control, the nuances around the abuse where there's no visible bruises. And I'll also be working with my guests and giving them therapy and coaching. So I'm trained in an array of modalities like IFS, somatic experiencing, EMDR, breathwork, positive psychology, brain spotting, a lot of stuff I'm trained in. And I'll be using those in my sessions so you can see how I would work. And I know you're going to get some snippets of some of these things. And I know you're going to take a lot away. It actually came from this idea or podcast that I did. I was interviewed by two wonderful women last year. And it was 2 hours of them firing questions at me about narcissistic abuse. And I came away and I thought, wow, that was like a masterclass. My audience would love, love, love to hear the whole of that. But it also felt like a bit like a therapy session for them because I was asking them things. Why does that matter to you? How does that make you feel when they do that? So a lot of these key questions that I would ask, because I work a lot around physiology sides of things, not just the psychology. And I absolutely loved it. So we're going to rebrand. We're going to redo all of this with those survivor stories. So that's on Tuesday, the 8th of April. And I would love you to continue with your support too. It really does mean the world to me because I know what it's like to feel alone in this space. I really do. That's why I do what I do. So back to this episode. Are they actually a narcissist? It must be one of the questions I get asked all of the time. You know, how do I know if they're a narcissist? Are they a narcissist? Well, the first thing that I want to say before I sort of dive in a little bit deeper is I'm going to put a quiz in the show notes for you. And that quiz, go and take it. There are 15 key questions in there. And at the end of that, you'll know because they're really great key questions. Now, remember, there's also a spectrum of narcissism because there's 10 different types of narcissists. So, you know, my ex, for instance, would never take me to court because he didn't want to be in a courtroom because of authority. Yeah, I know others, it's like they will take you to court at the drop of the hat. You could breathe wrong and they would want to take you to court. So, and this is what makes it so difficult, isn't it? It's not a one size fits all. There are nuances, there are complexities. It's almost like a narcissism spectrum, isn't it? On that, and one narcissist isn't any better or worse than another because actually what's important is how you feel in that relationship. So go and take that quiz and I'll pop that link in the show notes for you and that'll definitely help you, and I'll drop you an email with your results and then any other support that I can give you. How do you know? You know, one of the things I get asked a lot is, you know, am I the narcissist? Am I turning into the narcissist? And there's a couple of things to think about here. One, no narcissist would ever ask, am I a narcissist? It just wouldn't happen. So by nature of you even thinking, are you a narcissist, means you're not. So let's get that out of the way. But sometimes our behavior when we are in these narcissistic relationships starts to change. And it almost feels like we become a little bit toxic as well. We become really heightened in our emotional reactions. And there's a scientific reason for that. In our brain, we have something called mirror neurons. And sometimes we're mimicking other people's behavior to stay safe in those scenarios. So really our perception is, and remember, as human beings, we're built for survival. And that's to move away from pain. That doesn't mean we're not in pain. It just means we're trying to find the least amount of pain that we could possibly be in any given moment. So if we're in these abusive relationships and the narcissist is showing up with certain types of behavior traits, then logically you'd think, well, if I showed up like that and literally mirrored their behavior, because behavior clearly is okay because that's how they are, then surely I will be okay. However, sadly, that sometimes means we end up showing in more of a toxic way. But remember, we are doing that to stay safe in that scenario because we have more mirror neurons than a narcissist. Narcissists have very few mirror neurons, and these are things all to do with empathy. So very often those in relationships with narcissists will have a huge amount of mirror neurons. That's why most of us are empaths as well, if not all. Because we really care and we're really feeling other people's emotions in this scenario. But it also means we start to mirror sometimes narcissistic behavior. I've worked with a number of clients before where they've come to me and they've said, both my parents were narcissists. You would never, ever have two narcissists in a long-term relationship. It just wouldn't happen. So when we start to dive deeper, and very often what happens is they think then, okay, this is the parent that's a narcissist. But when we go even deeper, that isn't the parent that's a narcissist. That's actually those mirror neurons, and that person is a codependent trying to act like the narcissist, trying to stay safe. So we often start to uncover different family dynamics in this scenario with how people are showing up. And it's a really, really interesting concept because I think when we're in these narcissistic relationships, we're really judgy of ourselves. How could I stay? How could I be so stupid? What is wrong with me? It must be me. They're always saying things. I'm a drama queen. I'm so sensitive, because these are the words they're saying to you. And this is called gaslighting. You know, they do the behavior. You push back and maybe question things. They shut you down about how you are asking about their behavior, and you learn to stay silent because you don't want to argue. You certainly don't want to feel like you're in conflict all of the time. So you end up shutting down. That's why most people who end up in long-term narcissistic relationships are completely in a freeze survival response, still functioning, going about the business, especially if you've got children, but actually in a deep freeze response, likely on occasions to have explosive moments of anger, then feeling like you're judged and people think you are crazy, because sometimes there's something called reactive abuse where the narcissist will poke you, make you erupt and explode, then film you even, say you are the bad person, and then you shut down even more. So you just switch off to your emotions. What's the point? They don't listen. They don't care. I'm just completely shut down. Problem with that is it often leads to chronic illness and disease, which is why when we are internalizing our emotions because we feel like we don't have a voice, don't be surprised then when we start to get digestive issues, autoimmune disorders, skin conditions, endocrine issues with our hormones. Don't be surprised, because if we're internalizing all of this stuff and that energy, because it's like boiling up inside of us and we're not externalizing it, it has to go somewhere. And if we're living permanently in these survival responses, remember, human beings built for survival, that's all we're focused on, survival, not because there's any real actual danger. We're talking about emotional pain and danger, because that's what the narcissist is triggering in you. So you're purely focused on that, not feeling that emotional pain by showing up in a certain way, internalizing all of that, feeling like you don't have a voice because it's not going to get listened to. And then we start to get these autoimmune disorders. And in fact, I heard a podcast the other week with Gabor Mate, who I absolutely adore. He's amazing. And he was talking and saying 80% of autoimmune disorders are in female people pleasers. Now, that doesn't surprise me. You know, my mother had rheumatoid arthritis from her early 30s. Completely see why. Perpetual people pleaser, totally internalized her emotions for fear of what other people might think of her. She didn't think she could have her voice and say what she thought because she thought people wouldn't love her. So she internalized all of that. So many of us are living in a freeze response, internalizing our thoughts and feelings and emotions for fear of retribution, judgment. But that has to go somewhere. So all of our systems that should be in balance, working beautifully, if we're not in a survival response, aren't doing that because we're focused on survival. So everything starts to go to pot. And then we wonder why we have a chronic illness. And this isn't just for people, obviously, who are experiencing narcissistic abuse. This is any survival responses that we are perpetually living in. We're more likely to suffer with those chronic illnesses because we're pumping out cortisol. That leads to inflammation. It leads to a whole host of other issues. So if you do have any chronic illnesses, get curious about that. Do you feel you have a voice? Do you feel like you could speak your truth? And remember, speaking your truth doesn't mean you have to speak it in a rageful, angry, disrespectful way. You can still speak your truth because you're honoring who you are. The problem being is we worry about what the other person says. But we have no control over what the other person says. That's their stuff, not yours. You should always be honoring yourself. And that doesn't mean you can't still do it in a compassionate and kind way, coming from a place of self-led energy. And that's what's really important. In the work I do with internal family systems, that's what I try and teach my clients to do. We're leading from self. That doesn't mean we don't feel hurt and pain. It means we're not leading from one of our protector parts like anger, judgment, frustration, irritation, because that comes across. And then how do other people receive that? Likely in a defensive way. They say stuff back, and that perpetuates the problem. I'm going to go and stuff my face and eat something. Another protector part. I'm going to go and drink a bottle of wine. Another protector part. All the while trying to distract you away from not feeling good enough because you've internalized all of that too. So it's really interesting when we're talking, this isn't just a case of a toxic, bad relationship. The nuances and complexities that start to come with a narcissist make it really challenging for you. Because remember, narcissists will behave in a certain way in public and then in a different way in private. And it can leave you feeling confused because they'll throw you some breadcrumbs now again about being nice to you. And you think, well, maybe it was me. Maybe it will be okay. And then something will happen and you get stuck in what we call this abuse cycle, where you're pumping out nice bits of dopamine when they're being really, really nice. And there's the breadcrumbing, just keeping you hanging on enough. And then you maybe push back. Maybe you ask them something, they don't like it. Then there's silent treatment, anger. That triggers your core wounds. You start to produce more cortisol. And we get stuck in this hormone looping cycle of dopamine and cortisol. And that's actually what we call the trauma bond. Trauma bond isn't just a word when we're in these relationships. We're talking about physiology here. We become physiologically addicted to that hormone secretion in that cycle. So it makes it very challenging to exit these relationships. Or even if we do, we often end up finding ourselves in another toxic relationship. And this is the work that I love to do. This isn't just the psychology of these relationships. I look at the physiology side of these relationships, what actually goes on inside your body, your nervous system that is driving everything. Because you know what? Your nervous system will override everything else if it feels that it is dangerous. You can't think your way out of healing trauma of narcissistic abuse. It doesn't happen. So I hope that's been really helpful for you with some of those nuances to think about. Are they a narcissist? Are they not? And you know what? The word narcissist is just a word. It's a label to help you recognize, yes, they are. They will not change. And they'll make everything your fault. And then it's almost like we need to put a full stop at the end. Now focus on your healing. But I get it. It is important for us to start to recognize these things. Are they a narcissist? Are they really? Are they just a toxic person? What is the difference with that? And if you're really curious about diving deeper into all of that, then go and check my quiz out in the show notes. Have a go at that. I'll send you an email with your results. And I'm sure they'll be quite interesting. And the questions are really interesting for you as well. Maybe you haven't thought about some of those too. So take care. I hope that was really helpful. The countdown is on. Not long, everybody. Tuesday, the 8th of April, brand new podcast, No Visible Wounds, No Visible Bruises, coming up. So excited to share it all with you. Take care, my friends. And remember, I'm right here by your side. Also in the show notes, I'll put a few places where you can come and connect with me and be in my world. So you're not on your own, because you're not on your own. Don't be alone in this. Do not be alone. Lots of love, everybody. And I'll see you on the next episode.